Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So, as one of the main goals that the podcast has tried to do is to explore the impact of automation in as many relevant industries as possible, I think I've had the really good fortune to have a few episodes on how agriculture is being disrupted by these types of technologies. So previous episodes have looked at how automation has impacted a couple of specific things, mostly the threat of invasive weeds, the potential benefits of IoT in crop monitoring, and even the emerging vertical farm industry. But in today's episode, we'll go a little bit deeper into agriculture by looking at one of what I think are the essential actions of the entire sector, that being harvesting, and how it is being automated and what kind of repercussions it might have for both farmers and, of course, workers now and in the future. So to discuss this and how the future of specifically specialty crop harvesting might look like is my guest Kyle Cobb, the co-founder and CFO of Advanced.Farm. So Advanced.Farm is a venture-backed startup based in Davis, California, and they're building 21st century farm equipment centered around automation, with the very first product being a robotic strawberry harvester. At Advanced.Farm, Kyle is reunited with a founding team that had prior success in robotics with a company called Greenbotics. So Greenbotics pioneered robotic solar panel cleaning for utility-scale solar farms and was ultimately acquired by SunPower in 2013. But before Greenbotics, Kyle worked in mergers and acquisitions at Bank of America and Pearson, which is a London-based education company. And Kyle has a BA in Business Economics from UCLA and an MBA from the UCLA Anderson School of Management. And he currently lives in Davis with his wife and 2 kids. So I hope that you enjoyed the episode, and of course if you're at all interested in how automation is going to be impacting agriculture, I think that this is quite an interesting episode as we really do focus a little bit more on the social impacts that these technologies bring about. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the Automated Podcast, Kyle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. The way that I like to start off every episode is to get a little bit of a kind of personal point of view from my guests. So we'll be talking about automation, of course, harvesting, farming. So maybe you could just touch on kind of what initially got you interested in automating harvesting.
Sure thing. So I am one of 4 founders of our company, and one of the other founders and I actually go back to high school together up here in Northern California. And about 10 years ago, this same team got together to start a business called Greenbotics that did robotic solar panel cleaning, where we were building robots to clean solar panels out of these big utility scale solar operations out in the desert where there's not very much water and labor. And we ended up building that business actually from a barn on a tomato farm in a town
Okay.
called Davis, California. And it's Davis is a bit of a farm town. Some people would even go so far as to call it a cow town. And when we built that business and ended up selling it, we started sort of getting inspired by the next problem. And as we looked around Davis, it's just there's so much ag activity going on that I think those problems really inspired us. So we started learning more about the market, talking with our friends in the industry and growers around California, and this theme of the challenges associated with finding labor, increasing minimum wages, really tough working conditions. I think all of those things really demonstrated a clear market need for
Mm-hmm.
automation in farming. And then beyond that, I think our technologists were just really inspired by sort of the technical challenges, right? Bringing robots to this industry is something that hasn't really been done before. And so I think they were really inspired to try to solve some of these really cool technical problems. And both of those things together, I think, just got us off on a course that
Mm-hmm.
was really exciting. And pretty quickly, it snowballed into building a team around solving this, bringing automation to farming.
Right on. Yeah, that's really cool. Maybe we can touch on some of those challenges though, because I think, I mean, I've had a couple episodes where I've discussed kind of either vertical farming or
Mm,
farming in general, but
right.
maybe we can touch on like the context of harvesting and farming as it relates to automation. So, um, you mentioned, for instance, like labor shortages. Is this something that's
Mhm.
quite predominant? I know that you're based out of California. Is that something that is, I guess, growing as a trend?
It is, yeah, and maybe just to frame it up a little differently, every piece of fruit and veg that you buy in the fresh
Mm,
produce aisle in a grocery store, pretty much around the world, is picked by hand today, right? So, no one has really cracked the code, and consumers are really picky on top of that. And so it's a really challenging technical problem, compounded by the fact that consumers are picky and to touch on your point, there's a decrease in the number of laborers willing to do the
mhm,
work.
mhm,
Um, and here in California, where this is really a big industry, right? Fresh produce, a lot of it's grown in California. Uh, the, there's challenges to find the workers, and then there's also increasing minimum wage and changes to the overtime laws that sort of just put a lot of pressure on growers. Even if they found the workers, they can't work as
mhm,
long.
mhm.
And so, yes, this is something that we've heard about for a while. It's been a growing trend, and I think the trend is only helping us. And I would say beyond that, I'd say the workers deserve everything that they're given, right, and
Mhm,
more.
mhm.
It's just really challenging work, and so beyond just the regulations that are kind of boosting their wages and improving the quality of their work, they still need help because it's really tough,
Yeah,
tough work, and I think growers see that too.
yeah, yeah. Maybe we can then touch on the harvesters themselves, right? I mean, I also
Hmm.
come from a rural part of Canada, so I mean, during the harvest season, I mean, typically as blueberries, you just see
Oh,
tons and
right.
tons of people outside, bent over, kind of all day, hurrying back and forth to the place where they're depositing the ripe fruit. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, I don't know specifically how, I guess, the quality of that harvesting is done, right? So this might be something that we
Hmm.
touch on later with the automation. But when it comes to like human pickers, of course, we have the nimble hands. We've got a vision system that is phenomenal. But do you have any kind of insight as to whether like is a lot of the harvesting like wasted when it's done by humans, especially because it's kind of done in such a rapid time frame?
Well, I would say, yeah, humans do a great point out, right? They're biologically equipped with a great vision system,
Yeah,
gentle
yeah.
grippers, really nimble arms. And so I think what makes it really challenging in strawberries and to some extent blueberries, is that there are multiple harvests every year, right?
Hmm.
And so for strawberries, they're harvested basically every day. A field is harvested every day for 6 to 9 months, depending on where you are in the season. And so uh, that makes it really challenging to mechanize because you have to be really gentle with the fruit. You have to
Hmm.
pick only the red fruit because there's green fruit flowering behind it that will be red soon that a grower can use to generate revenue. And you also have to be gentle with the plant, right? Because the plant
Yeah.
has to survive for 6 to 9 months. And you have to move as quickly or very quickly like humans do. So it's a really great task for humans to do, and they actually do a really good job. I'd
Okay.
say we don't hear a lot of gripes from growers about the performance of humans. It's more just the availability and the cost, I would
Yeah.
say, to some extent. Um, we do see a pretty big opportunity to improve the sort of the consistency in the pack that consumers receive. Just to your point, one of the challenges is when, in order to really motivate a workforce to move quickly, workers are typically paid on what's called a piece rate
Hmm.
agreement, where
Hmm.
they make somewhere between $2 and $3, or let's say 40 to 50 cents a pound, to pick the fruit. And that doesn't perfectly align incentives because you might get a green berry that you try to sort of hide in the middle, of the pack that the
Right.
consumer won't see. So we do see some opportunity to improve, but I'd say uh, mostly humans do a really good job, and we're just trying to sort of supplement the workforce.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting to know. I think it's kind of the greater context of what we're talking about. Um,
Sure.
one of the things that came up in the other interviews that I had regarding farming and harvesting in general was
Hmm.
kind of the trend of automation or mechanization of the industry. So, is this something that you and your co-founders have been kind of aware of, that maybe over the last 10, 15 years or so, that there's been an increasing, I guess, amount of automation in the field?
Yeah, I'd say we see it as sort of a generational shift.
Mm,
Uh, if you look at the tractor, it really hasn't changed for 40 or 50 years, right?
right.
I mean, you've got air conditioned cabs and GPS navigation to sort of which is more utilized in, I'd say, row crops or broadacre crops. But what we've seen over decades in some of those other crops like corn and wheat and soy is that there's been a lot of progress with mechanization and improving the ability to harvest those crops with tractors, let's say,
Hmm,
and do
hmm.
other things with tractors. But it's also come in parallel with progress in the plant biology and genetics, and to some extent the farming practices. So
Mm,
I'd say that I see a similar wave happening in specialty crops and in fresh produce, where we're seeing a lot of attention on the mechanization side. And I think as we see the tech catch up, let's say, or start to come together, we'll also see more time and energy devoted to improving the genetics and improving the
right.
growing systems in a way that they'll all converge in a
Yeah.
really transformational way, call it over the next decade or two. And we're really excited to be part of that change and actually influence, the direction of where some of that's headed. So yeah, we're well aware of it, and I think it's sort of right. We're happy to be on the bleeding edge of the innovation.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. That's also one of these other trends that keeps coming up, depending on the different industries that's talked about on the podcast, right? This kind of convergence of different kinds of technologies that come together that enable, like a organization or startup such as yours, which I want to get into in just a minute. So,
Sure.
maybe the kind of the last question around this contextualization of what we're talking about here,
Hmm.
I think deals with the mechanization aspect of it, right? So we talked about, the great systems that human pickers have, but what about the challenges, the tech challenges of autonomous systems, right? So you mentioned, soft grippers are quite an important thing. The dexterous little hands and fingers that we have. Not so much when you kind of picture a robot, right? You typically picture a hard, cold, very strong gripper or hand. But then also kind of the vision systems. I know that this is the AI vision systems are some of the things that are been drastically improved over the last, say, 5, 10 years. Um,
Hmm.
you maybe touched to the challenges that those kinds of technologies deal with as it relates to harvesting and farming in general.
Yeah, sure thing. I think for us, it's it, one of the biggest challenges is just the interface with the real world, right? In that, if you think of sort of a traditional industrial automation, you can effectively design an entire factory or production line around the robots,
Yeah.
right? And so you've got really controlled lighting, controlled conveyor systems, and you can take a picture 5 seconds down the conveyor and process all the information and throw a ton of processing power at it, so that by the time the robot is ready to do an action, it's all pre-planned, right? And there are
Hmm,
very
hmm.
few things that are unexpected. But I think in the real world, it's not the case, right? We have to adapt to wind and soil and a bump in the road,
Right.
and changing plant biology from one day to the next, uh, and all sorts of variable conditions that if you were running a factory, you would just never let happen. And so I think that imposes some interesting constraints. So for example, a lot of the off-the-shelf robotic components or industrial automation components don't really
Hmm.
work in that environment, right?
Okay. Okay.
Not to mention all the besides all the ingress concerns about soil and wind and water and everything getting in. They're also just not. They don't quite have they weren't designed with that application in mind. So they're often very expensive,
Mm.
those components,
Yeah.
and especially when you try to integrate them, they look a little clunky. And so I think one of the things that we've done, actually, I would say not really intentionally, was we've ended up having to sort of redesign, rethink the what the tractor looks like from the
Okay.
ground up. And as a result of that, it's compounded the challenges associated with the technical problem, but it's also, I'd say, it's given us a chance to sort of purpose build a machine that is much more cost effective and much
Hmm.
more capable for this specific application and others like it. Um, so uh, yeah, so I hope that helps, and
Hmm.
I'm happy to address your specific questions on the vision system and the gripper. But that's kind of how we've come to realize the tech challenge in bringing robotics to farming.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, maybe that's a good segue then to talk about advanced farms.
Sure.
Could you maybe discuss? I mean, I'm sure many of the listeners haven't heard of you guys before. Could you kind of
Yeah.
give us the vision, the goal, kind of what your business is doing? Because I think it's quite interesting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we're Advanced Farm. You can find us at Advanced.Farm. That's our website and our brand. We've been at we formed our company in 2018, really with the mission to create a 21st century farm equipment company centered around automation. As I've mentioned, we
Mhm.
haven't seen a lot of change to the tractor in the last 50 years, and that's really one of the primary inputs for growers. So we want to give growers a little bit more, a better toolkit, if you will. The first application, first product we've been working on is a robotic strawberry harvester for in soil planted beds here in California, which
Mhm.
make up about 99% of the market in the U.S. The reason we focused on strawberries first was because it's actually one of the most important retail categories in all of grocery, certainly in produce, and so it's a really critical part of the American food system. Believe it or not,
Hmm.
consumers love strawberries. Grocery stores love strawberries because they're a profit center and they're a way to get shoppers back to the store. Um, and they also they're hard to take to another place in the world because they don't ship and they can't hold up well.
Right.
Like you
Right.
couldn't
Right.
just,
Okay.
take the whole supply and send it somewhere. And then a little closer to sort of the core business case is that strawberries are cost about $30,000 to $50,000 per acre per year to harvest, which makes for a really compelling opportunity to offset some of those costs with automation.
Hmm.
And we already talked quite a bit about the labor challenges. So I think this is a really good sort of beachhead market for us to develop a platform that we can then expand into other areas.
Hmm.
But ultimately, our goal is to become the company you think about when you think about automation on the farm, specifically robotics on the farm.
Right. Right. And that tractor that you're developing, right? This is an autonomous
Mhm.
system, right? It's something that can work by itself, doesn't necessarily need a human to kind of hold it and pull it along or drive it along in that case. Maybe you can then also talk about the gripper system and maybe the vision
Mhm.
system of the uh, device itself, because I think that's quite interesting for the listeners.
Sure thing. Yeah. So as you point out, we have a completely autonomously driven tractor inside the furrow,
Hmm.
inside the beds, let's say of the strawberry block. They just how the system works maybe will help users or sorry, it will help listeners understand it. And then I encourage everyone to visit our website and watch a video. You'll understand this better. Basically, a human operator one operator can run up to five machines at a time, and you could imagine five machines sort of waiting at the beginning of a block of strawberries. Over each machine covers two rows, two beds, and the user presses start on
Hmm.
each of the machines, and the machines travel on their own down the rows, and there are cameras on the robotic arms looking for on the end effector, basically looking for red berries. The soft grippers that we've developed then go down when they see a red berry and pick the red berries and hopefully don't damage the plant or any green berries that are on the plant that will
Hmm.
be ripe
Hmm.
soon. And then we pick the berry and put it into a tray that collects the fruit. The trays then swap automatically after a certain amount of time, and then at the end of the bed of strawberries, all the machines will stop on their own. A human operator will then come back to intervene and unload the fruit, where it then goes to be sorted and packed and sent to the grocery store as it is today. And then you sort of repeat the process.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the operation in a nutshell. and we've had to, as I mentioned, develop a lot of the subsystems to make that possible.
That's really interesting. I'm always fascinated to hear guests talk about the technologies that they bring onto the podcast. One of the things that keeps coming up, and
Hmm.
I want to ask you this: um, so you have the human, kind of the traditional human harvesters. Now you have this
Sure.
autonomous system that's able to
Hmm.
work night and day. So as a non-farmer, I don't know whether, is it the middle of the day that's the best time to pick these strawberries? Is it better at night when things are a little bit colder? Again, from my kind of rural background, I was seeing these poor people doing it kind of early morning, but also kind of throughout the day when it was blistering hot, and it does get hot in Canada. So, um,
Yes.
is is your I mean, of course your system is able to work kind of at nighttime, but is that something that is maybe taken into consideration by the farmers and maybe shifting or changing their entire process, or is that still too early for them?
It's interesting that you've already picked up on that insight, just with a little bit of background.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that is something that we're seeing where, um, with automated equipment, you should be running it based, especially that one that's not sort of a one for one human to robot ratio,
Yeah,
right? You should be running it all day and night, and that's part of how you really get the financial returns that you want.
exactly.
So I think we are. It didn't start that way, right? So many months or years, right? You go out and your equipment doesn't work so well, and really it's about trying to demonstrate to the grower that you're working hard and you're trying to solve the problem, and you're making headway on the various technical challenges. But then it's pretty interesting because it does pretty quick. At some point, all of a sudden, it shifts into an operational problem, and you start
Hmm.
to think about not so much about de-risking the tech, and really it's about improving the unit economics through better collaboration with your grower, changing some of those sort of systems level aspects of the operation that you mentioned, right? Operating more hours and
Hmm.
finding the optimal configuration of the human crew and what the tasks are and how you incentivize those people and train those people to be safe and efficient. And so I'd say that's kind of the phase we're in now, where we have some really forward thinking grower partners that we're working with to really set the template for automation in the future. And I'm really excited about that because it presents a new set of challenges, but it's sort of it's more inspiring than the slog of working through like a
Sure,
fundamental technical challenge that just feels like it's never going to end.
sure, sure. I wanted to go back. You were mentioning that once the tractor is moved from the start of the road to the end of the road, there's
Hmm.
now a human operator that has to come in to unload the trays. Is that
Yeah.
the only time that a human is interacting with it, or are there other points where there is some kind of human machine interaction?
Well, like all equipment, right? There's a maintenance interval
Yeah.
on various systems and cleaning and things like that. But no, we've tried our best to really make the equipment autonomous, which is a challenge because it also means that we have to sort of design the systems to make decisions on their own.
Hmm.
But that has been something we've really tried to focus on, is removing the human, is scaling the human operator as part of our system.
Right. And these human operators, I would assume that these are people that have previous harvesting experience. So these are people that are already, I guess, hired by the farmer, or these people that are disconnected from the farm themselves. Is it part of your team, or is it part of the farmer's team?
It varies, and I would
Mm,
say one of our core kind of design philosophies has always been to uh, not make it's just been to conform to as many conventions as we can to minimize the friction on the business side and the
mhm, mhm,
technical side. And so in some cases, what that is it's us training a grower's workforce on how to use the equipment, which allows for sort of better integration with their daily operations.
mhm.
And in some cases, it's a little bit of leading them to water by showing them how we would operate the equipment,
Okay.
and it's a longer process. I would say one thing that we're particularly excited about, is the ability to give workers that are involved in the harvest operation, farming operation today, sort of some better career prospects. And one example that we always look to is in our previous company, Greenbotics, when we were doing uh, autonomous cleaning of solar panels out in the desert. And I have to say, outside of strawberry harvesting, that's probably the worst work I've ever seen.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
it's wet.
Yeah.
It's a big broom. You have a broom and a power washer, and you're like scrubbing the panels, and it's
Right.
literally millions of panels, right? And so it's really tough conditions. And what we saw with integrating robots into that industry was we actually elevated an entire workforce of people
Mhm.
who were familiar with this work and the challenges that it presented. And so they offered something skill wise, right? But they also were able to acquire a new set of skills in robotic solar panel cleaning operation and became technicians. And so we actually created this entirely new class of worker that didn't exist before. And I think we're seeing something similar with the strawberry harvest, and we're trying really hard to work with our growers to kind of make that opportunity clear to the
Mhm.
people involved on the ranch, because I think that it helps with integration, and it also sort of helps the acceleration of the tech to be adopted if you have more people who are trained on the equipment.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Yeah, that was exactly the kind of answer I was looking for.
Mm,
One of again the trends that keeps coming up on the podcast is that yeah, automation or autonomous systems are typically seen as something that replaces jobs, right? Completely eliminates the human
yeah,
worker. But more and more, it seems to be that. I mean, that can be done to a limited extent, but then there's the opportunity for skill for workers, previous employees to be kind of upskilled, right, or gain some new skills. Um, in the kind of new work activities that are being done by the autonomous system.
totally.
You were also saying that there's like kind of one operator between
Mhm.
five different tractors.
Yep.
Is that something that you're looking to change over the next, say, 5, 10 years, where there would be kind of one operator between, I don't know, 10, 100 different machines in the future, or or is that something that you're okay with right now?
I do think that over time, what we're really excited about is to get to the point where the tech is consistently reliable and performance enough that we can hand it over to growers who will
Hmm.
do things with it that we could never imagine, right?
Right, right.
And I think what you're saying are some examples of that. But it really requires sort of transformational thinking, and often that happens with growers once they have the tools and they're sort of looking at their own. They're taking their own decades of experience and saying, okay, now what can I do with these things? So
Mhm.
I definitely see that as the kind of the end state, but I'm not sure that we're going to be the ones to get it there. I think it'll actually be some really forward-thinking grower partners who want an advantage over their peers who are trying to find all kinds of ways to use the equipment.
Right, right. Yeah, innovation within the growers themselves. I guess typically most people wouldn't think that farmers, for instance, as a general category, aren't innovative, but I think the opposite is quite usually true, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's not for everyone. There's no
Mhm.
question about that. Some people would rather see their neighbor using it before they use it. But I think
Yep.
for us, that helps too, because it allows us to sort of filter and find the right partners, right? People who are willing to take risks, calculated and measured risks, but risks to advance their operation and sort of and become the next sort of generational leaders in farming.
Mhm.
So certainly, I'd say every grower has their secret sauce, and in some cases, it's trying to find new tech that they can integrate, and in some cases, it's something totally different. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been fun to watch our partners kind of push us in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Maybe the kind of last question
Mhm.
on this topic. So I also do work on the side apart from the podcast, which deals with smaller organizations kind of introducing robots into manufacturing processes.
Mhm.
And one of the things that keeps coming up is the employees, like the people that are on
Mhm.
the ground, the actual operators, might be a little bit hesitant to bring in a robot because their fears are typically connected to, well, this robot's going to come and take away my job. Is that
Yeah.
also something that you have gotten kind of a sense for on the ground with some of the harvesters that you're working with?
I mean, it's certainly something that we have to address head on, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's another area where we can work really closely with our growers to message, this is what you're seeing. I mean, it's sort of like, training with any new piece of equipment, right? Or new thing that you see on the ranch. This is what we're working on. This is why.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is how you can be a part of it. And what's really interesting is I think if you as we have learned to sort of frame the conversation the right way, we've actually gotten really good feedback from workers
Yeah.
that we've taken into account, both with respect to our operations or food safety, or even tech development, like time and motion of how a worker picks a berry, right? Or how they sort a berry, or think about how to pack a
Mm-hmm.
clamshell. All those are insights that we shouldn't learn on our own, right? We should really look for guidance there. Um, so that maybe that's one thing I'd say, and the other thing is it's surprising that um, I don't get beat up a lot about reducing costs significantly. What
Hmm.
what we really see is that uh, there isn't a big enough labor force to do this
Yeah.
work today,
Yeah.
and so it's sort of like um, uh, I don't think workers feel particularly threatened. I think it's that growers need more support on the ground for people to do this work,
Hmm.
or robots to do this work.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the first order, is let's bridge the gap, help our growers do the task, and then over time we'll find ways to reduce the cost, or improve performance.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, maybe connected to that then, kind of what's the speed of the tractors themselves? Like if you have a group of, I don't know what the equivalent is, at like 10 harvesters versus one tractor, is that kind of the speed that we're talking about, or do you have even
I
numbers on
see.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I see. So maybe the best way to describe it. So right now, as we talked about for strawberry harvest, it's all done by hand,
Yeah.
right? So there isn't is- there's no machine equivalent to sort of compare it to. But our let's say our target, and what we're seeing in the right conditions, is that we can reduce the harvest labor headcount by 60%.
Okay.
So it's a
Okay.
it's a pretty meaningful number.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite significant, and especially if, as you mentioned already a couple times, there is this like large labor shortage. I think that's something that'll be more beneficial than it is kind of scary or negative for the growers and for the harvesters themselves going forward.
Right.
Maybe kind of moving beyond this. So, I mean, I know that you're focused on strawberries as kind of that one crop, and you discussed why at the beginning, why it's a
Hmm.
kind of an important one. Is there any kind of future vision as to, moving beyond strawberries, or would that also then require such a technological change, transformation in the tractors themselves?
No, I think it's a question that we're commonly asked, and I think
Mm,
what we're trying to do is just be really good partners to our current grower customers. And actually, what we find is that as we gain credibility and gain an understanding of their problems, there are more sort of problems that we can help them with, right? And
mhm,
so I think
mhm.
there are plenty of opportunities to automate more parts of the strawberry farming operation, from when they're planted all the way when they're packed and shipped to consumers. So I would expect that if we do this again in a couple of years, you'll see some more equipment in strawberries. And then I do think, as I said, there are this is everything's picked by hand right now, right? With
Yeah,
very few exceptions.
yeah,
And so there's all kinds of, it's a blue ocean, as they say. And I think what we're doing is trying to figure out, of all the building blocks that we've developed up to this point on the technical side, how can we adapt those to some of these other crops, in ways that will kind of accelerate our R&D. And so I think if we were to do this in a couple of years, you would see that we're harvesting crops in it, or at least making progress, in a couple different areas
mhm,
outside of strawberries, and we have some more equipment to engage more deeply with our strawberry grower partners.
Okay.
I would say our sweet spot, at least for now, is certainly specialty crops and fresh produce.
Hmm.
I don't, we're not we're not really looking to compete with combine tractors and the big broad acre crops at this point, but we are keeping our ears open in case that something comes up there.
Okay. Okay. Maybe kind of the last question on this topic then. I mean, I
Hmm.
touched on the speed, but I think there's also, if I look to like other industries, there's also kind of a question regarding quality, right? So you
Hmm.
can have an autonomous system go through, pick out all the red that the vision system is able to see, but there might be, I think I read an article where it was discussing, some of these plants, the leaves might be growing too large to kind
Yeah.
of hide some of the actual ripe fruit underneath, whereas maybe a human would be able to pick that out. Um, do you see that as kind of a major challenge, or is that just simply the technology has to get a little bit better, or as you mentioned, some of the genetic transformation of the plants themselves might need to adapt to this new autonomous system? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say maybe just broadly to assess the question around quality. I, I think what we found, and my guess is what a lot of people in this space find, is the first thing that happens when you go out and visit a grower. So there's like this multi-stage qualification process where you open up the hitch of your trailer, and they can pretty much tell right away if you're a serious company
Mm.
or not, just based on what rolls out. And then after that, the next biggest question is like, are you going to damage my fruit, or are you going to damage my field? Right. And so we spent a lot of time really early on saying to make sure we could say no when we were
Mm.
asked that question. And then after that, it's sort of like about optimization and integration and improving the performance. So I feel pretty comfortable with our overarching impact on quality, and I think that is a big barrier for a lot of people. Um, what we To answer your question around sort of plant biology, and yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge. It's also a challenge for humans, by the way. I mean, if you see a human harvest crew over the course of the season, the amount of fruit that they pick versus what's left behind um, also goes down
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
because of the leaves. But they're really good at the task, and I think it's a combination of improved technical performance and uh, added features both on software and hardware. And then I think there's a little bit of sort of meeting in the middle that has to happen with growers and breeders. Well, one of the ways that we're excited about trying to solve this problem is this sort of meeting in the middle of growers and breeders, and while the technology continues to improve. And we recently signed sort of an agreement with the UC Davis breeding program, strawberry breeding program, which is one of the leaders in the world, to develop cultivars that favor robotic harvests.
Hmm.
And so I think that as we've gained a lot of credibility in this space, we're seeing partners that are more willing to commit resources to help us solve this problem. But certainly a big part of it is still us improving the tech.
Okay. Okay. Really interesting. Um, Maybe then, to follow up from this, and kind of maybe one of the last questions, and we can take some time to go into it. Um, I always like to end the podcast on kind of like the future vision of what's going to happen in the industry, right? So if I can kind of take everything that you've been speaking about, and also the articles that I read beforehand, like automation is definitely, and I should say maybe like autonomous systems, whether they're tractors or others, are definitely going to be more utilized in the growing in the farming industry, more than we've seen before.
Mhm.
I would also assume that COVID has kind of pushed this along, right? Getting farmers interested in this because of the maybe even increased labor shortages that you've mentioned. Can you maybe paint a little bit of a picture for the listeners as to kind of what you see? And of course, it doesn't have to be 100% right. I mean, everybody, it's a little bit difficult to fully understand what's happening in 10 years, but your
Mhm.
own personal point of view, could you maybe paint a picture of like what the next 10 years would look like, regarding automation and farming in general?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's actually, I think we have a really good example that we can look to now, or a few really good examples. And I would say the first one is just with what we've seen with row crops. I'll kind of reiterate what I said earlier in the podcast, and that is that um, we've seen over it's taken a generation, right? But we've seen
Mhm.
a lot of tasks become mechanized, everything from tilling to and cultivation all the way to harvest and post processing of fruit. So if I suspect that the specialty crop market will go that same direction, right? We're seeing apples become
Mhm.
trellised to facilitate for automation. We're seeing the way that fields get planted in other crops also start to think about automation, and genetics are being bred to favor automation. So I think that specialty crops and fresh produce is going to look a lot like what the broadacre row
Mm,
crops look
mm,
like today. It's going to be a field that you see very few humans come every day, right? Instead of hundreds of cars pulling up to a strawberry farm,
yeah.
you're going to see a dozen. And those dozen people are going to be operating equipment making sure that the fruit gets from the field to a cooler. And then in the cooler, you're going to see a lot of activity, probably also automated, that um, positions that gets the fruit into the final pack for the consumer in a really attractive way. So I don't think any of this is particularly far fetched. It's just it hasn't we haven't really gotten to the point as an industry, as an automation industry, where a lot of the components have been able
Mhm.
to be available or be built upon to integrate into these really elegant solutions on the ranch. Um, so I think that's a big part of it, and then I think the other part of it is just which of the growers are going to lead the charge in in it's accelerating their own adoption,
Mhm.
and I think probably improving their own market share because of their inherent sort of structural cost advantage that they'll get through automation. But I think in 10 to 20 years, you're going to see a lot of a big generational shift in how fruits and vegetables are picked.
Very interesting. Yeah, this is this is definitely one of the main trends that keeps coming up on the podcast. So thanks for kind of corroborating and supporting that idea. I also think, as somebody who loves technology, obviously it's kind of an interesting visual picture to see, many of these kind of autonomous systems doing a lot of the harvesting, a lot of the picking, and maybe the planting and the other aspects of plant farming in the future. Very interesting. Thanks a lot for your insight. Where can people follow your work and get in touch? I'll of course have the Advanced.Farm website on the show notes, but is there any other place that you want the listeners to go and check you guys out?
Yeah, I think that's the best spot. And what I would say is, I'm guessing that a lot of your listeners are actively involved in the sort of automation industry or passionate about automation, and
Mm-hmm.
those are people that we want to talk to. Right, we're building a great team here in Davis of cross-functional engineers, multidisciplinary engineers, and business people, and farmers, and people that are passionate about really what we're trying to do. And so certainly, our website and our LinkedIn page are the best places to go and find open jobs if what I'm saying resonates with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a grower, certainly visit our website, and you'll find different ways to contact us. And I'll give you a personal invitation if you're ever out in California and you want to come see a robotic strawberry harvester, or you want to taste what the robotic strawberries taste like. I'd be happy to host you in the field as well.
Terrific. Well, once COVID is settled down, I'll definitely take you up on that offer.
There you go. Yeah,
Right on.
anytime. Thanks for the
Terrific.
opportunity to chat today. It's been really
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on to the podcast, Kyle. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.